the key piece is not worrying about how to pay for it, both from the driver side, but then also on the rental fleet side. Because when you
Hmm.
rent from a traditional rental company or a gig rental company, the rental company itself typically prior to using Bluedot would have to go manually look at all the charging data,
Yeah.
reconcile all that, and then bill the driver after the fact. We now handle that all for them, and we automatically bill their drivers on a daily basis for their charging expenses.
All right. Martin Hamadani is the Vice President of Partnerships at Bluedot, where he leads the commercial and growth efforts for their B2B fleet business. With over a decade of experience in leadership and business development, Martin has a proven track record of scaling startups and providing step change growth to businesses from Earnest, Lending Tree, and more. Martin, how are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you, Harry?
I want to say you're based in Chicago. Is that right?
That's correct. I'm based in Chicago, but we
Okay.
are headquartered out of Palo Alto, California.
That's right. I knew I had the Chicago feeling in the back of my head, but I knew there was a little bit of a twist because the team, I guess most of the team is based in Palo Alto, right?
Correct, yes.
All right. So I'm excited to dig into Bluedot. You and I have been working closely on the fleet side over the past, several months. And I think the product that you've developed is really cool, really interesting, and it hits on a theme that we are seeing explode in, I would say, the broader mobility, the rideshare space, and that is EV, right? So I'm going to dive all into that. But first, before we get into that, tell me a little bit about Bluedot. What is the company? What do you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bluedot, we started 3 years ago, initially focused on solving the public charging problem. And what we mean by that is ultimately there's all these different public chargers out there, but for each of them, you have to download an individual app, have an account on each, and have a credit card on each. So when we originally started the company, we started with a consumer app that we aggregated a variety of public chargers in the country onto one solution for consumer EV drivers to go out there, find those chargers, find the availability, and charge their vehicles across a variety of different stations. So instead of 10 different apps, one app across a variety of charging stations. And then throughout, as we grew, we realized that a lot of our existing customers were actually part of fleets. And we realized that there was a large opportunity for us to create a more all-in-one EV fleet management solution, including our public charging piece. So we have three main areas of focus: public charging accessibility. So for our fleet product, we actually aggregate over 80% of the public chargers in the country onto one platform for fleet drivers to find, charge, and pay for public charging. We're actually the payment provider on record. We've built the payment rails to the charging stations.
Hmm.
So then we're actually making the payment for fleet drivers. So then fleets don't have to worry about how they're going to assign credit cards to different drivers, have accounts across different providers. We do all that for them, and then we can simply bill them at the end of the month, or we can actually bill their drivers directly depending on the type of fleet they are. And then the second main area that we focus on is our home charging, tracking, and reimbursement. So as fleets start to scale and their drivers start taking the vehicles home, they need an ability to track the home charging sessions, because those are sessions that should be reimbursed, given that the driver is charging at their home garage, for example, and using their own utility for that. So we can track all that information because we connect directly to all the vehicles via software and both traditional telematics. And then we can provide fleet managers with home charging data, so then they can reimburse their drivers with the receipts that we provide. And then we provide a full dashboard of analytics around the fleet's charging behavior, so then they can optimize their drivers' charging over time.
Very cool. So let's start at that kind of core problem of, I've been driving a Tesla. I'm now in a Model Y. I had a Model 3
Yes.
before. So I've been driving a Tesla or EV, basically, I want to say for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years, long time. And I think what you hit on, right? If I've got a Tesla, I've got this supercharging access. But if I'm on a trip or I need, I was actually in Santa Barbara recently and I pulled into a garage and I actually needed to charge. And there was a charge point right there. And luckily, I did actually have an account that I set up, but it took a while. I had to reinstall the app,
Yep.
download my account. And so I think it sounds like that is maybe the core problem that you, I guess, started solving and I guess sort of still are solving. Or how do you see that like kind of customer problem of like, hey, there's a million different charging, providers, especially if you have a non-Tesla? How big of a piece of the business is that today?
Yeah, that's definitely still the predominant focus of our business today. When you think about fleets, especially small and medium duty type fleets and types of vehicles, they
Hmm.
are looking to figure out how do I allow my fleet drivers to charge when they're on the go, so to speak, on the
Yeah.
road. So they may be larger companies that are potentially also investing in like depot fixed infrastructure charging, but are also
Hmm.
still looking for that on the go solution. And then if they're a smaller fleet, they definitely don't have the ability to invest in depot charging. So then they're definitely
Gotcha.
looking for this public piece. So that's still the primary driver is simplifying, finding the chargers, understanding what's available, and actually
Yeah.
charging through one solution. And then again, the key piece is the payment side, because then you don't have to worry about how am I going to
Yeah.
manage the payment? All the data flows back to our fleet customers directly. So they're always aware of what their fleet drivers are doing at any given time.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically every charging option in one app, right? It's everything from the third parties, from the Tesla, from the home charging, and maybe you're a fleet that uses a depot. And I think that's kind of the key piece that you might have kind of, even if you're a Tesla driver, you got your go-to, supercharger, for example, but there might be times where you need a third party and maybe it doesn't happen that often, but when you need it, you're really going to need it. It's going to be an important
Exactly. Yeah.
situation.
I mean, your point exactly. Your just your experience recently, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the goal. So even if they're like, okay, we already have a depot, for example, our drivers typically charge here, but there's going to be an instance when you're on the road and you need to charge, you're in a
Yeah.
bind, and you don't have the ability to go download an app, add your corporate card or your own personal credit card
Yeah.
on there, create an account. So we simplify that whole process. And then, yeah, the whole idea of becoming this kind of all-in-one solution is now that we've added home charging, you can do kind of everything that you would be
Mm.
doing related to public and home. And we are looking to add depot tracking in the future as well. So that is something that's part of
Yeah.
our pipeline as well.
So let's talk a little bit about the home charging for a second,
Sure.
because I feel like, I've luckily had access, I have a house. And so I've had a home charger in my house for, as long as I've owned a Tesla. I've got solar on my roof. I mean, so this is like, solar is an amazing investment. And then you put the home charger in there and you can charge level two, so my Tesla goes up to 30 miles an hour that it basically, fills up the tank. And so overnight I can get a full tank of EV. I don't know if you call it gas or full charge basically. Talk about like, do most drivers have access to home charging? Are there stats around this? Because I feel like, especially when it comes to rideshare drivers, and I'm guessing this extends to, fleet drivers, but like this is like the number one, I guess you would say, like factor for success to me. Like if you've got an EV and you have home charging, your numbers are going to look really good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think across the US, it's about 70% or 80% of just traditional retail EV drivers that are actually charging at home, right? And
Mm,
then if you look at that compared to the fleet side, it's definitely a smaller percentage, but everyone on the fleet side is actually trying to figure that out right now. They're trying to
hmm.
understand, do we one give our employees chargers, right? In that
Yeah.
case, then there's a capex cost, and then there's obviously
Mm,
liability associated to that as well. Do we just allow them to buy their own charger and then reimburse them? There's a lot of different factors, and we're actually working on policies for our customers where we're actually guiding them on, hey, here's the different ways to think about it. Whether you do provide a charger, allow the driver to just buy their own charger, but the key either way is that they want to be able to track the data so they can reimburse them for those costs, because it's still an employee, vehicle.
hmm.
So the employer has to kind of pay for those costs. On the rideshare side, that is also something that's becoming more kind of important as well. It's like, hey, I don't want to have to go deal with potentially public. I'm just going to install something at home. But then depending on where they work or where they potentially get their vehicles from, that structure can vary. But yeah, the home piece is becoming more and more critical right now, I think, across most fleets, particularly on the corporate fleet side. They're all trying to understand the solution, how they should be
Hmm.
reimbursing their drivers, should they provide them the hardware or not. So these are all questions that we're helping guide them as well along the path.
Got it. And I mean, I guess it's pretty clear for those with an EV, the ideal situation is, you have that level two. Well, actually, let me ask you, is it you have a level two home charger where kind of like what the setup that I have? And then maybe solar too, I feel like makes it even more compelling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because ideally you're charging overnight, you're charging off peak
Hmm.
hours to save even more money. So in that
Yeah.
case, you can handle using a level two charger. You don't really need the speed there. But then when
Yeah.
you need the speed on the public side, for example, with our app, you can actually filter for faster chargers and you see what's around you
Hmm.
and then route directly to that station.
So let's talk about Uber and Lyft drivers for a second, because I know that this
Absolutely.
is an important piece of your business, working with fleets. One thing we found is that, most of the demand for rideshare services is in, the busy downtown, dense areas, higher socioeconomic areas. Most drivers can't afford to live there, right? They live out east, north, south, west, suburbs, right? Or even apartments. And I feel like these drivers don't often have access to home charging or can't install it, period. So is there anything kind of specific to Uber and Lyft drivers? Like, okay, how important is the home charging? And then if so, like what are their kind of best options that, the fleets you're working with, like what are they doing for charging for their drivers?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we actually work with a lot of gig drivers today. We work with a lot of fleet customers, in particular on the rental side, that
Hmm.
rent EVs to the gig drivers, so to Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, as part of both those companies, both Uber and Lyft and the other gig companies have goals of getting their fleet to be more EV. So we
Hmm.
actually work with a lot of different rental companies there. And what we do is primarily provide them that public charging experience. Because as a gig driver, you want to be able to easily find when you're on the road, where's the
Yeah.
nearest charger for me, what's available. And again, the key piece is not worrying about how to pay for it, both from the driver side, but then also on the rental fleet side. Because when you
Hmm.
rent from a traditional rental company or a gig rental company, the rental company itself typically prior to using Bluedot would have to go manually look at all the charging data,
Yeah.
reconcile all that, and then bill the driver after the fact. We now handle that all for them, and we automatically bill their drivers on a daily basis for their charging expenses. So then the drivers also know exactly how much they're spending every day. They can
Yeah.
pay those bills just the same way they would potentially be paying if they had an ICE vehicle for gas. They can pay that in the same time for the EV charging and really have that comfort of knowing, okay, I'm out there, I can find the chargers. This gives me the ability to find over 80% of the country. We're actually soon adding more to our network to get to close to 90% of the country in terms of coverage. So I think for
Nice.
gig drivers, it's key is like, hey, we're going to be giving you this one solution when you rent from us or from that fleet customer that this will allow you to just go out there, start charging. And also, by the way, you can handle all of your expenses and billing through the same platform.
Yeah. One behavior that I've noticed from Uber and Lyft drivers who are renting EVs is that they use chargers a lot, right? Like anytime
Yes.
there's downtime, hey, you might as well, you've got this limited range and, you might use it in a single day, right? Especially if you're driving in and out of the city, right? If you have an hour commute in, an hour commute out, like you can fill up, my Tesla is 300-mile range, but I really only get about 70% because I drive a little crazy. So I'm at
Right.
210 miles. I mean, 210 can go pretty quickly in a day for an Uber
Yeah.
and Lyft driver. They put a lot of miles in their vehicle. And so I feel like I've seen, and heard from drivers that, they'll go 5 minutes, 6 minutes, maybe hopefully maybe longer, but they fill up, and charge a lot of time. So I think having that access to, where the chargers are, what's working, all the different, maybe there's a charge point, maybe it's an EV Go, maybe it's a Tesla. It's like whatever
Yep.
is nearby, and maybe I need a coffee and I can fill up real quick at this station. So I think that is there any other, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if there's any sort of unique behaviors from a product or sort of just general perspective that you've seen with these Uber and Lyft drivers who are using the Blue Dot
Yeah,
Fleet app?
absolutely. I mean, you kind of nailed it on the head there. They definitely are charging a lot more than your traditional EV, the rental retail customer, or traditionally even fleet driver for that matter,
Mm.
because they're constantly right on the go. And I think as far as our product, one of the key kind of focuses for the gig drivers is in real time, they're going to be able to see both the availability of the charger, so what ports are
Hmm.
actually available in real time, but then they're actually going to be able to see the last time that charger was used. And this is not just Blue Dot data. This is data that
Oh,
anytime the last time someone used that charging station, they'll know because
got it.
that's how they connect to the station. So they'll have comfort knowing, hey, someone used this 3 hours ago. I'm comfortable
Yeah.
kind of rolling up there. And then the other key is not only can we route them directly to that station, they simply just press route in our app and it takes them to that station. We actually just added our route optimization feature. So if they actually want to say, I'm planning a trip, let's just say
Hmm.
hypothetically from LA to San Francisco, they can actually put the addresses in there from A to B. And we actually have an AI routing optimization tool now where it'll tell them, here's the best chargers to go to along that
Mm.
route based on your current battery levels and your vehicle type. And then we'll
Nice.
outline for them where to go. So I think that's going to be huge for our gig drivers, particularly as they're kind of maybe planning their day or they know where they're going to end up. They can use the route optimization feature as
Yeah.
well.
Well, even I'm glad that you mentioned that last time the charger was used, because that's a big
Yeah.
complaint that we hear from drivers. They get up
Yep.
to, I won't throw any charging networks under the bus, but they get up to a certain, different types of charging networks or chargers, and it's not working, right? It says that it's
Right.
available, but if it hasn't been used in, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 days, that's probably a good sign that, oh, something's wrong with this charger. And, I think the first charge point one, I guess, that I tried to use, luckily they had 4 or 5, but the first one I tried to use wasn't working. So I just used the stall right next to it and figured it out. But yeah, that's an important one.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a critical data point that we've like most of our fleet customers love because to your
Hmm.
point, yeah, if it says, hey, you used like 20 days ago, maybe you don't want to roll to that station, right? Maybe you should go somewhere else. And if it is actually out of service, we will put that. But to your point, sometimes the data is not entirely accurate coming from the actual charging station provider itself. So
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. So, kind of my last question on this, I
sure.
guess diving more into the sort of rideshare and EV more broadly. I mean, I think
Mhm.
to me, it seems like, these drivers are putting a lot of miles. I mean, a lot of people don't realize like a full-time Uber and Lyft driver does 1,000 miles a week or more. If they're renting, they're really incentivized to drive 40, 50 hours a week or more. So maybe even more than 1,000 miles. So they're putting a lot of miles on their car. And so as a function of that, they're charging a lot. And then they're charging frequency, like we talked about. They're charging multiple times anytime they have a little break. Anything else you've noticed from kind of working with some of your fleet customers? I know we've had rideshare cars on before, Seamus. I know that I believe that they're one of your partners, and they rent out a bunch of EVs to their drivers. Anything else you've learned from, kind of that more behavior of rideshare drivers and this product?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Rideshare Cars is one of our great partners and customers, and we've grown with them over the years, and also like through them actually gotten a lot of kind of product feedback, and a lot of
Hmm.
that's related to our customer support side as well. We actually have 24/7 customer service through our app, and a lot of the gig drivers typically end up using that. So anytime they have any sort of issues at the station, for example, or any sort of questions, they can
Hmm.
use our app to start talking to our team, and then we can guide them through it. In some cases, we can even remotely turn on charging for them, depending on the station, depending on where they are.
Hmm.
So that's been one of the areas that we've seen in terms of behavior. But you're right. I mean, they're definitely charging a lot. And they're also, I would say, from a cost perspective, they're price sensitive and cost sensitive in general. So they always want to know like the data. And that's why we in real time
Hmm.
show them here's how much you're charging. You can go into your app and look at all of your history for the day, for the week, for the month. So you're never surprised when you get that bill. You understand, hey, I actually did spend this much charging my vehicle, especially because they're charging a lot. And since they're gig drivers, if they're trying to manage their budgets, we want to
Hmm.
be very transparent with, hey, here's the data that's coming to you. So even with rideshare cars, they know that their customers are going to be happy renting
Yeah.
from them because rideshare provides Bluedot to all of their, EV renters.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about their fleet. I believe they've got some Teslas and they've got some non-Teslas. Any thoughts on, Tesla? Obviously, they're the biggest, EV and maybe even car
Yeah,
player, in the
yeah,
country these days, non-EV. Any
yeah.
thoughts on sort of the Tesla versus non-Tesla, just EV experience in general, how it relates to, the work you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can work with across, we're EV agnostic as well as
Hmm.
kind of CPO agnostic as well with the ones we work with. A lot of our
CPO.
excuse me, charging station network or charging provider
Got it.
essentially. So the different providers that are out there with the ones we work with, we do have a lot of customers that are focused on Teslas.
Hmm.
And I think that was, if you think of the last couple of years, there was a lot of deals and easier ways to buy Teslas in bulk. And I think that's actually now shifting to the other way, where all these other OEMs are starting to open up and say, hey, we want to get our vehicles out there. We want rideshare drivers to use this as well. So I think we're going to start seeing more and more non-Teslas out there. And to be honest, that's where our solution helps them even more because with Teslas, you also have the charging map in your vehicle, right?
Yeah.
So it's easy to relatively find at least superchargers. But for all non-Teslas, you don't have the ability to find, hey, I want to find all these different charging networks in one
Yeah.
place. How do I do that? But we are starting to see folks like actually rideshare cars and EV Access and other rental customers buying and leasing more non-Tesla vehicles.
Hmm.
And sometimes I would say actually drivers prefer non-Teslas. There's an interesting like data point that's come out recently that like a lot of people find Teslas harder to like drive or kind of that
Hmm.
initial onboarding of like, how do I use this car? Maybe there's no
Mm.
stock, maybe like all the different aspects of it. Whereas some of the other EV OEMs are more traditional layout, right? So it's a
Mm.
little bit easier to get in and just go. Whereas
Interesting.
Tesla, you kind of have to like learn a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've actually heard from a variety of our fleets, particularly on the corporate fleet side. They're like, hey, like Teslas are actually
Yeah,
like
that's a good point.
harder for them to figure out. So we don't want to have to deal with that. We're just going to give them a Ford, Chevy, whatever it might be. That's more kind of traditional vehicle
Yeah.
layout so they can just get in and start using it.
Yeah, and I think I've driven a Tesla for so long, it's hard for me not to drive a Tesla,
Right, right.
these days.
Yeah,
And
you're used to
actually,
it, right?
it's funny. I'm going to have a funny story to share. When you mentioned EV Access, I want to talk about
Yeah,
them before we get off. I have a funny story
sure.
about them. But so for me, it's hard to go away. But I actually like that point that if you're a more traditional, you've been in an ICE car your whole life, it's kind of the perfect like gateway. Like, hey, you kind of get a Ford or a Kia or what, and it's kind of like a normal car, just EV, right? And
Exactly.
so all you have to worry about is like charging, or like maybe the extra power, right? It's not like a ton of different. Tesla is a big jump up in, I think, good ways, but I could see it being overwhelming for a new driver.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, yeah, we're on the same page right there. I'm comfortable with Tesla, but I can totally get it if you've never been in one, for
Yeah,
example. Again, like how do you like shift the gears and there's no stock and all these kind of like the basics that you're used to in most
yeah.
traditional vehicles that the other EVOMs are very much like still sticking with that, which can be good for certain drivers.
Yeah. Have you heard from any fleets, anything around Tesla? Like, one thing I've noticed is that, here in Los Angeles, for example, there are so many Teslas on the road. Sometimes with my son, we play a game where we just on the freeway, we count the number of Teslas that we see. And like
Yeah.
sometimes we will literally see like 3 to 5 cars in a row that are like white Tesla Model 3s, or the exact same
Yep.
car, three in a
Yep.
row. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing though for any of these fleet owners. Have you gotten any feedback or any thoughts on that?
It's funny. I think either fleet owners, it's like a love or hate
Mm,
situation here, where they either love Tesla and it's easy to use and they're comfortable with it, or
hmm.
they're actually like not anti-Tesla, but they just do not have Teslas in their fleet and are
Yeah.
choosing not to go down that path. So we have customers that have mixed, but a lot of them are actually kind of being like, yeah, we love it, or no, we only have Polestars
Got it.
and Volvos and BMWs, and we're not really focused on that, or we're focused on Ford. It really depends on the fleet itself because some of them
Yeah.
have deals with the various OEMs as well. But I think it's very much either like you go Tesla and you go all in Tesla because then it's easier
Hmm.
to, I would say, scale it, or you're kind of mixed fleet or no Teslas at all.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting from us, and it really depends on the type of fleet to see what kind of vehicles they actually have in their fleet.
Got it. Okay. Last question on Tesla. Maybe I can't make any
Yeah.
promises, but the supercharging, I think one of the reasons why Teslas have been so popular, with the Hertz rental program for Uber drivers, I believe I saw a stat that 10% of the rideshare miles from Uber in California now are on EV basically. And I think a big driver of that is that Tesla Model 3 Hertz rental program. I think the
Yeah.
superchargers are so valuable, right? That it's
Yes.
like, I call it dummy proof. It's like, hey, your car's running out of juice. Go to the supercharger. Here's the nearest one. Let me preheat the battery for you. And, it just seems like that supercharging network is very valuable to Tesla. Maybe, fleets that are very high mileage fleets. Any thoughts, there with the supercharging?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that it's definitely like the most obviously still one of the biggest value charging networks in the country.
Hmm.
And
Like, I guess
obviously,
my question is, like, if I'm a high mileage fleet, is it like a slam dunk to go Tesla because they've got or, if I'm like a high mileage fleet and my drivers don't have great access to chargers, like, do I kind of, is there any reason not to go Tesla?
I would say it depends on your one, probably maybe like location. Maybe
Hmm.
there's not as many Tesla. Like to your point, California, no
Yeah.
problem. Texas, no problem. Florida, like Illinois, certain states you're gonna have no issues. I think it depends on where you're located and where your drivers are going to be driving. And then I would say maybe it's just more that like flexibility and functionality. If you're Tesla only and you are driving a lot, then you're going to probably run into instances you're on the road and you're not maybe near a Tesla station, but you might be
Hmm.
near something else. And that's
Yeah.
where again that dilemma comes in of like, hey, I'm out there, Tesla's great and easy, but what if I'm actually somewhere else that's a charge point or EVgo, for example? And some of those obviously have Tesla ports as well, and vice versa. Obviously, Tesla's opening up
Yeah.
to non-Tesla vehicles, but that still hasn't really shifted yet. So
Yeah.
I think it depends. I think it depends on the type of fleet they are, and again, the comfort of their drivers and
Hmm.
location more so than like yeah.
Yeah, the only downside, if it is a downside, is the supercharging we've noticed for the rideshare drivers is very expensive. I mean, it really adds up the cost. I mean, some of these drivers
Mhm.
are two, three, $400 a week in supercharging costs. And so I believe that you guys kind of help the fleet owners do it more of a daily reconciliation of those charges so that drivers aren't hit with the end of the week, huge bill that they probably can't pay or haven't saved for.
Yeah, exactly. That's for sure true, is that they're can be more expensive. And we actually have the best kind of membership rates across the charging station providers that we work with.
Mm,
So for example, like retail customers can go to like EVgo and whatnot and pay monthly subscription for better rates. We
mm.
have those for fleet customers across the different networks that we work with as well. So allows them to also save money than if they were to traditionally go there on their own.
Nice. Well, and we know that these guys are price sensitive, so there might be times where, hey, if they've got an hour to kill, maybe they go to a different charging network than a supercharger because it's cheaper or, off peak, like you mentioned. So seeing all those different
Exactly.
options and being able to go for the cheapest one seems very valuable. So I want to
Right.
shift the last part of this conversation to sort of the fleet owner side. You guys work with a lot of fleet owners. We've sort of covered the rideshare, the Uber and the Lyft piece. Let's talk about some of your other partners. Like, what are the categories where your product has had the best fit and sort of that you guys are going after these days when it comes to
Yeah,
B2B
absolutely. So
partners?
like we already talked about the rental kind of vertical,
Hmm.
but we'll talk about the other one. So corporate fleets in general have been a great category for us. So that can
Hmm.
range from anything like a pharmaceutical company sales fleet. A
Mm,
lot of the pharmaceutical companies today have already put certain goals, whether it's 2025, 2030, in terms of
mm,
transitioning their fleet to fully EV. Companies like that to utility companies, a lot of them have transitioned their internal fleet to EVs already. So anyone that's kind of a corporate fleet, whether they're only 20 vehicles to hundreds or thousands of vehicles,
mhm,
on the corporate side, we're seeing a lot more of that transition starting to happen. And then again, they need a solution like this because their drivers are on the road. For example, pharma sales fleet drivers also drive a lot. They're on the road and they need a good charging solution, but they also take their vehicles home as their personal
mhm.
vehicle. So
Yeah.
then they need to be able to track the home side. So corporate fleets in general across a variety of like sub verticals, as well as government and municipalities as well. So cities are starting to transition their internal fleets to EVs as well and
Uh-huh.
have a lot of mandates for that as well. So we're starting to work with governments and cities as well to help them again manage that their internal city fleets to access public, also taking the vehicles home. So we're seeing that today. So for example, we talked to another city this morning where it was both their like
Mhm.
maintenance vehicles and also even their police fleet starting to transition to EV, right? So then they're trying to
Yeah.
figure out, okay, how do they go charge their vehicles, even if we are also investing in, again, depot charging.
Gotcha. Okay. So corporate fleets, and especially, I imagine like home charging, that, the product aspect that you mentioned there, that's pretty big for
Yes.
them, for folks that are working corporate or, sort of higher income jobs. And then what other categories? So we talk rideshare, corporate fleets, and then are there any other categories you guys are going after, have
Rideshare,
had
corporate, and then
success?
government municipality are like
Okay.
the kind of three main buckets today. And we're starting to expand and look into the healthcare categories. Oh, that kind of falls under corporate
Yeah.
as well. Because the
Got
corporate
it.
umbrella can be anywhere from pharmaceutical, utility, healthcare companies, like HVAC companies, any of those that are transitioning their vehicles.
Okay. What about car sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. Car share for us kind of falls under our rental category, so to
Okay.
speak, but we can also work with the car
Like kind of
sharing
the
providers.
rideshare rentals.
Yeah, exactly. Rideshare rentals, any sort of car sharing. Again, I think the value add for them is we automate the payments to their drivers, which is a huge
Hmm.
actual manual time suck for them today, where they spend on average our rental customers, and this includes rideshare and rental is spending about 6 hours a week doing
Hmm.
manual reconciliation on just charging data that they then have to charge their drivers after the fact. So we kind of handle that entire process for them instead of spending all that time doing manual work. You just let us handle the whole process and it's all
Got it.
automated on our end.
What are some of the differences between, car sharing, like a more traditional, like a Turo, a get around, where I'm renting from an individual owner who, often these folks, they've got one, two, up to 10 or dozens of cars. It's sort of funny, if, because I'm so used to the Tesla now, whenever I do a road trip, I almost have to rent a Tesla Model 3, or I kind of
Yeah.
prefer the Model Y for a little more space. And it's fun if you click on the owner's profile, they'll usually have a bunch of Tesla listings.
Yep.
And what are some of the differences between the car sharing and kind of rideshare rental piece with the fleet owners that you work with? Because I feel like I get, and also more broadly, like, is EVs and car sharing and car rentals, is that growing? Like, I kind of imagine that it's growing because of, all the people like me who have Teslas, and now when they rent a car, they're like, I got to have a Tesla.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely growing space for us. Well,
Hmm.
again, we're continuing to see more smaller rideshare rental companies that are already potentially using Turo or any of these other players, and
Hmm.
they're continuing to grow and they're adding more EVs. And a lot of them are actually also looking at creating their own essentially rental platform, potentially getting off of Turo, depending
Mm.
on their scale as well. So that's definitely something that we're seeing. But again, both sides need to utilize this for their kind of customer experience. They're saying, hey, we're going to give you a Tesla, even if you're renting it or a EV for 3 days. We want you to feel good and think that we're giving you the best customer experience. And that's
Yeah.
where kind of the Bluedot platform can come in. We don't see too much of a well, I would say there's two categories. There's kind of your traditional rental company where it's short-term rental, and then there's kind of these rideshare rental companies that are more focused on the medium and long-term rental, where those drivers are typically renting the vehicles from them for months or
Hmm.
potentially even years. Whereas, then there's the regular rentals that are, say, a couple days, 1 day. But either way, the solution kind of plays on both sides. It can work
Yeah.
for either scenario and help them get out there, charge their vehicles, and not actually think about any of, again, the payment and manually handling any of
Yeah.
that work.
So I think on my last trip to Phoenix, I believe, I'm trying to remember why I went. I think it was a bachelor party. We flew into Phoenix and then, oh yeah, we went to Scottsdale and then we went to Sedona. That's what it was. And I rented a Tesla Model 3. And I don't think I actually realized it until after the trip, but I believe I rented from Justin at EV Access. I rented a Tesla Model 3 or
Yes.
a Model Y. And I remember, sort of messaging. I don't think I was messaging with him, but maybe one of his folks on his team. And then I was like, oh, this seems familiar. And then I think at some point it clicked, but I don't know if he knows this, but I ended up renting a car from him at one point.
Yeah, that's amazing. Then you most likely then you went to his actual location to pick up the car right from the airport. Is that how it worked?
I
Or do you remember
think,
where you?
okay, so here's what I did. And this is why I thought
Yeah.
it was actually pretty cool. I flew into Phoenix and they've got a cool sky tram. So you kind of have to really read the instructions carefully or no, do it once and then but like I think I went the wrong way. But then once I figured it out, I went the right way. You go to a
Yeah.
parking lot, you get right off, the car's right there. They can, unlock it remotely, right? And so you just grab the car, grab the key, and you're kind of off and driving. So yeah, that was kind of like the pickup experience. And that's sort of where I'm curious to know what your experience has been like working with these more traditional car rental fleets and owners, because I feel like, especially the Turo and the Get Around, we just had Maria Brisman from Get Around and Hire Car
Yeah.
on. I really love this. Like the rental car experience is so, I guess you would say, broken, right? So a lot of these newer technology focused companies, it's like, wow, it's so smooth. You get off the plane, if you know where you're going, you go to the car, automatically open it, you're in a Tesla, and boom, you're driving off. It's pretty cool feeling. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, that was basically my experience, but it was a good one.
Yeah, yeah, no, Justin's great. EV Access is great. They're actually one of our earliest customers, and we've evolved again, grown with him throughout the years.
Hmm.
And he's actually been really great for us from a product feedback perspective. We've learned a lot about how he wants his, again, rideshare renters to experience the renting experience, the short-term renters to experience it. We've actually built a lot of different features throughout his team's feedback over the years. And like a lot of that automated stuff of getting into the vehicle and actually potentially controlling the vehicle, we actually provide him as well
Mm.
on our side. So he can actually do full remote access. They can do like pin to drive on the Tesla side and like limit capabilities of their vehicle. If, for example, there's a rideshare driver that's not paying their bills, for example, or driving to a destination that they shouldn't be going to. So all those capabilities we work with him over the years as well to implement on our side. But yeah, he's great, and I'm glad you randomly ended up renting from him without realizing, because like I said, he's actually
Yeah.
also built his
I
own
think
platform, and that's why.
Yeah, no, I think the only issue I had was that I believe they didn't provide a charging cable in the car, or maybe I needed to request it ahead of time.
Ah,
And so, I
okay.
got to the house we were renting in Sedona, and, it would have only been the normal 110 outlet, but, it would have at least saved me a few minutes, of supercharging. So I wasn't able to do that. But again, that like kind of comes in. Maybe there's that home charging piece that you guys offer, which, like, to me, I'm kind of more an experienced EV user and renter. So it's like, I know, all right, anytime I have downtime, I might as well plug in because it might save me a few minutes or,
Right.
whatever, save me a stop, right? When it comes to charging. Because it
Yeah.
is, I do remember, like, I think I did have to, like, I didn't quite make it all the way back. You have to maintain a certain level of charge, right? Or there's options, where they can refill it for you. So it is like a little confusing, that whole, like, there definitely seems like an opportunity to kind of like smooth out that process. And I'm someone who's an experienced EV driver. So I feel like that definitely is opportunity.
Certainly, yeah. We one of the things we realized with this, particularly the rental companies, we think about Hertz or really any of the rental
Hmm.
companies that are renting EVs today, the majority of people renting EVs from them today are actually first-time EV
Mm,
drivers, or they want to like experience EVs. So the issue with that is then there is a kind of educational gap. Again, like how do I use this vehicle? How do I charge this vehicle?
yeah,
So part of what we actually provide in our app as well is like full educational videos, kind of like charging 101, how to charge at the
yeah,
station, how do you use a Tesla, how do you use a Ford EV, and then how do you use a charge point versus an EVgo and so on. So we actually guide them because we work with a lot of these rental companies and telling us, hey, the driver's
yeah.
coming in, the rental company themselves is not providing as much of that education. So that's where we're stepping in and saying, okay, like let's kind of
It's sort
guide.
of tough though, because if I'm on vacation and I'm doing a 3-day trip and reading an EV, like, do I really want to watch a bunch of videos and tutorials? Like, I'm kind of lazy. Like, I just rented an Airbnb for the weekend and the host was sending me like pages of guides and info. And I'm like,
Oh,
oh, this is way
certainly.
too much. Like, what's a good sort of balance? Or have you found any kind of like shortcuts or, sort of like best practices with these fleet owners who are renting EVs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point exactly, we try to limit our videos to be like a minute or less. So they're
Hmm.
very quick of like, here's a quick guide. We also provide them essentially like full kind of step-by-step instructions written as well if they wanted to provide that to their drivers. But it's
Yeah.
more just like the quick hits, kind of having info bubbles across the entire experience, understanding, hey, how do I do this very quickly? So that's part of the feedback from our fleet customers as well. Like to your point, yeah, no one's going to sit here and read 10 pages or sit here and watch a 10-minute video, but how do we divide this up and make it really digestible so then they can feel comfortable getting in the car and going. So we're actually, particularly with our rental customers, we also have like a one pager pamphlet that we're putting in
Hmm.
all their vehicles as well. Hey, here's like the 3 4 steps on how to start using this and just
Yeah.
go on your journey, make it as fast as possible.
Very cool. Well, yeah, I definitely recommend folks on the next time they travel to check out, these car rental or, car sharing sites and look for the EVs, maybe look for, especially if you're going to
Yes.
the Arizona area, check out Justin with EV Access because it is pretty cool, getting the Tesla or getting an EV. And then a lot of times too, I've noticed with Get Around or Hire Car or, sorry, Get Around or Turo, we just interviewed Get Around Hire Car. So I've got them on my brain, but Get Around
Yes.
or Turo, there's different options where the owner will coordinate, they might have the car waiting for you or it might be closer, in the parking lot, or you can go to them. There's a lot more flexibility. One time I flew into Las Vegas and I took JSX, which flies into the private terminal, and the owner
Yep.
actually had the car, the Tesla, waiting for me in the lot. So I literally like cruised off, grabbed my
Right.
golf clubs, went into the car, and it was like the smoothest airport pickup drop off experience I've ever had in my life. And I just thought it was like pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm glad you had those experiences. And I agree with you. I think everyone should. And people need to, there's a lot of that, the range anxiety and the experience that
Yeah.
most people who still haven't driven an EV. And it's like, once you get in an EV and
Yeah.
actually experience how smooth it is and how fast it is and everything that's associated with it, I think you'll realize, okay, I actually like this.
Yeah.
And I actually want to drive this more.
What's been the biggest challenge getting these different types of fleet to adopt the Blue Dot product?
I mean, I think it's depends on the type of fleet. I think there's a kind of internal kind of question that they have to answer around, do we want to allow them to go charge publicly or do we want to invest in depot charging, right? So that's the question
Hmm.
that we see a lot across the type of fleet. So like the corporate fleets of like, do we want to spend the time and money to invest and put chargers at our facilities versus going public. And so where we come in, we always try to guide them through that and say, listen, like even if you have depot, you can just use this for on the go. And by the
Yeah.
way, the solution that's you can start using right now versus
Yeah.
those, installing chargers will take a year plus and cost, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. So I think that's one of the challenges, like getting them comfortable to
Yeah.
understand, hey, you can actually already have EVs in your fleet because the solution already exists. It's the public charging
Mm.
infrastructure. Here's just an easy way for you to access it. So getting them comfortable understanding that there's already those solutions and their drivers can go out there. Similarly, on the home side, I think that was another big kind of barrier for a lot of corporate fleets of like, okay, well, they take the car home, they don't have like a gas tank at home. How does this work
Hmm.
for EV? And now we're trying to guide them on like, hey, you can actually do this already. Just let them go. Even if they charge in the regular wall outlet at home,
Hmm.
we're still able to track that data for you
Mm.
and provide you a receipt because we're connecting to the vehicles. So it doesn't matter what type of home charger they have, they can still go do that and then you'll be able to see the information.
Yeah, I guess yeah, that's the traditional, kind of build or buy
Yes.
discussion conversation, right? So what are some of the, I guess lastly, what are some of the best practices if I'm a fleet and I'm kind of considering, seems like the first piece of this is, like kind of the strategy piece for fleets, like what should you do? Like, hey, you've got,
Yes.
if you want a fleet of EVs, like what are the best practices? Should you build some chargers your own? Like should you just dip your toes into it and have them use public or and try to incentivize home charging? What are, if you kind of could knock down boom, 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 from most important to least, what are some of the best practices for fleets?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say the best practices that we've seen, at least on our side with our customers, is you need to, I think, dip your toes in, right? And get a
Hmm.
subset of your fleet. Typically, you're not going to go all 100% in, right? You already have,
Hmm.
let's say, 1,000 vehicles. Maybe you can start with 10 or 20 to 50 and get drivers that are comfortable to be your kind of pilot
Yeah.
testers. And the key for us is dip your toes in, understand how to utilize public. But the key there is actually gather feedback from your drivers. So a lot of the customers that
Hmm.
we work with on the corporate fleet side, we typically do pilots with them where we actually engage with them every couple of weeks, get
Hmm.
feedback from their drivers and understand, okay, well, how are they liking you? What are their questions? Where can we continue helping them
Yeah.
through that? So I think that's the first big piece is like dip your toes in, particularly on the public charging infrastructure side, because even if you know for sure, hey, I want to invest in depot
Hmm.
infrastructure and I want to put the money and build it, that's again, it's going to take so much time that
Yeah.
you're just delaying your transition to EV. And again, a lot of these companies have mandates and goals for certain EV by a certain time frame. So just get started and see what's out there publicly, and also be comfortable to let them go, charge at home as well. I think it's
Yeah.
that comfortable. Just get started.
Yeah, well, I like leaning into the fact, like who's already driving an EV, if you're at a company, right? Who's already got experience with an EV, because then that
Exactly.
dovetails into, they might have home charging and they might have
Yep.
experience with public charging. So then you can sort of test that, like, hey, okay, if you're using Bluedot, we've got access to all the public charging networks. You can also plug in 110. Maybe maybe some people already have the 220 or they're open to, getting an electrician out there and putting a 220, which honestly isn't always that cheap, might be hundreds of dollars or a little bit
Right.
more, but you can kind of start building. And then, like you said, yeah, I think the infrastructure piece is always a little tougher. And honestly, too, I think that it's a fixed supply, right? Like, so you're always, if you do build something, it's only going to be, X per day, right? The vehicles or kilowatts that you can charge. So you're always going to need, kind of that flexible supply.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. The depot side, yeah, like it's only going to be so much supply, and then you're gonna, as you scale your fleet, run into more issues with usage there. Maybe it's always going to be filled. And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
how do I charge? I need to charge my vehicle right now. Okay, cool. How do
Yeah.
I find the closest charger? So
Cool. Awesome. Well, Martin, really appreciate you coming on and sharing all the info about Bluedot, the different types of fleets you're working with, and talking about EVs. You can probably tell I'm a big fan of EVs.
definitely.
Great use case with Uber and Lyft drivers. And if folks want to learn more about you and what Bluedot is up to, where can they go? Where can they learn more?
Yeah, they can just go to bluedot.co and
Cool.
find our information there. And feel free to, they can reach out to me as well, Martin at thebluedot.co, if they'd like directly, particularly if they're a fleet and they'd like to learn more. Then again, they can, if they're a regular consumer and they want to use it, there's a consumer side to our website as
Mhm.
well they can go to, but it's all available there.
Cool. And I know you guys do a lot of trade shows and conferences. I think we're both going to be at Move America in Austin at the end of September. I'm hosting a happy hour too that I think I saw you RSVP'd for.
Yes,
So that might be a good one for folks to meet you in person. Anything else you've got on your radar,
absolutely.
CES or anything like that?
Yeah, we did go to CES this year. We're going to go to FLA, which is another corporate fleet event, actually right before Move America in San Antonio. So quite literally the week
Oh,
prior,
cool.
we'll be in San Antonio for that. So any corporate fleets, we'd love to meet you there. We'll definitely be at Move America. We're also speaking there and have a booth there. And then we're also, for the remainder of the year, planning on going to Fleet Forward, which is in November, and that I believe is in San Diego this year, where again, a lot of fleets. So we'd love to meet anyone that's going to be at those events.
All right, cool. Awesome. Thanks, Martin.
All right. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks for watching today's episode of the Rideshare Guy podcast. For more information on today's guest, please check the description. Now, you don't want to miss this interview of the Rideshare Guy podcast, so click here and also make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future ones. See you next time.